the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. This is a special episode that was recorded live in Fort Worth, Texas, as part of the Cowboy Artists of America's 56th annual exhibition and sale. The show was called Stories From Around the Campfire, and it was held at the world-renowned Amon Museum of American Art. I was joined on stage by 7 influential members of the Cowboy Artists of America community, and we had a panel discussion about the rich history and bright future of the organization. As you'll hear, the event was partly an in-depth educational discussion about the history of the CAA and the Western art markets, with the other part being hilarious stories from the organization's past 56 years. This event was the brainchild of CAA member and my good friend Teal Blake, who joined me on this podcast several years ago. Sitting on stage with me at the event were Fred Fellows, Jody Beeler, Bill Nebeker, Seth Hopkins, Tim Newton, Red Stegall, and Bruce Greene, all of whom are legends in the Western art world. And you can read more about each of them using the links in my episode notes. Each of these gentlemen brought a unique perspective and distinct experiences to the conversation. But across the board, they all share a deep love of the West, authentic artistic humility, and unwavering respect for the legacy of Cowboy Artists of America. This conversation winds in and out of many fascinating and sometimes hilarious topics. We had great discussions about the creative process, the idea of fully committing to the life of an artist, and how mentorship can play a huge role in the artist's journey. We talk about the CAA's unprecedented longevity in the art world, and how the group's annual trail ride plays an important role in building friendships and strong bonds between the artists. We talked about how the CAA selects new members and how the organization has evolved artistically over the past decades. There's no lack of sense of humor among these guys, so they share plenty of crazy and hilarious stories about the pranks and practical jokes that they've played on each other over the past 56 years. And you can hear from the audience's laughter that everyone in the auditorium was having a great time. I was honored to share the stage with these 7 men, and I greatly appreciate Teal inviting me to be a part of such a special event. I hope you enjoy.
Well, thank y'all so much. Teal, I really appreciate it. Let's give Teal a round of applause. He's been working so hard on this thing. Yeah, my name's Ed Robertson, and I'm from North Carolina originally. That's where this accent is, but I've spent the last 20 years in kind of the northern and central Rockies. And it's funny because when I'm walking around in Montana, a lot of my job has been working with conservation with farmers and ranchers, and I'd start talking to these different ranchers, and they look at me like, "Are you from Texas?" But then I come to Texas, and I start talking, and everybody's like, "You're a Yankee. You're from North Carolina." Anyway, I'm honored to be here. I got to know Teal about 4 or 5 years ago, and we really hit it off. And I've just, the more that I've learned about the CA, the more impressed I've been. And I got here on Thursday, and I thought I knew a little bit about what this organization means to these gentlemen, and I didn't, I had barely scratched the surface. And so I'm just honored to be here, and I appreciate you all being so nice to me and letting me ask you these questions. I wanted to start with Fred as the longest serving member, and I was telling Fred before we started, by any standard, the kind of research I do on these guys before we start, it could be considered stalking, because I get on YouTube, and when I met Bruce in the elevator the other day, I said, "I was just watching a YouTube video about you," and he got real nervous. But I was digging into Fred's background, and what I thought was so interesting is when he was coming along, the Western art market was nothing like it is today. I mean, obviously everybody's here because of this Western art, and when Fred was coming along, he had a job in the aircraft industry, and he wanted to be an artist, but was kind of having that push and pull. And I was wondering but he just refused to give up, and he forged ahead, and he, has now had one of the greatest careers in Western art you could have. So I was wondering, Fred, if you could talk a bit about your early days and that decision you made what you were just telling me about, when you decided, all right, I'm going to leave this salary job with a big company that takes care of its folks to go off and be an artist.
Well, I actually wanted to be a preacher, but But once I met Red Stegall, he wanted to too, and he said he went the other way, and so did I. I started out basically kind of to be a saddle maker, and started an apprenticeship to a saddle maker in Lyle Butler Saddlery in Southgate, California, and one day an old guy come in with a bunch of old saddles, and they needed to be fixed up, and his name was Smokey Bethel. What a name for old cowboy. And he says, Freddie, he says, you ought to come up and work with me on this ranch that he runs. He ran the Jameson Ranch, which was owned by the Monolith Portland Cement Company, but it was up by Tehachapi in the Tehachapi Mountains. And he said, you'll never make enough money, making saddles and roping steers, and I was team roping in rodeos and stuff. I was heading for a brand inspector of the Los Angeles stockyards. And anyway, and so I asked Lyle Butler, what do you think? And Lyle said, well, you ought to go up there and do that. That'd be a good experience for you. He said, working on the ranch is not the same as roping in a roping arena and everything. So I told him I'd do it, and I ended up going up there, and it wasn't as glamorous as I thought. The up in that country, the water's really the main thing, and every day they had these springs up there that had a pipe going, and the water would drip from the spring into a big tank, and the cows would get in and knock that pipe over, and then the water would be going in the mud, and these old cows would be sucking mud, and so every day I rode out from the barn with a wire snake, you know what that is, like a plumber's use, a big thing, and a big pipe wrench hanging on my saddle, and boy, that didn't look very cowboy to me. And so I'd ride 5 miles up the mountains and clean the spring out and try to set the deals that held the pipe up again and ride back, When I first got there, when I first pulled into that ranch, I put my horse in the barn and made a bed. I had a cowboy bedroll, and I didn't see anybody around or anything. And so then I see the dust on the road, and here comes Smokey up, and he parks. He says, I see you got in and everything you doing okay? And I said, yeah, but I couldn't find a ranch house, anything to go have breakfast, He said, well, there isn't a ranch house on this ranch. I said, there's no ranch house or bunkhouse or place where you eat or anything? He says, nope. He says that when you pull in off the highway, there's a restaurant and a gas station down there, and that's where you go and you just eat and sign your name to it, Jameson Ranch. So I said, you mean you can have a malt and a hamburger for breakfast? He said, you can have anything you want. I said, well, this ain't a bad place to work, I kind of think. Anyway, make a long story short, I had a chance. I worked there for a while, and it was, I finally one day, he said, there's a telephone call to you down at the restaurant, and go down there. And I called, it was my stepdad, and I'm just glad there wasn't a death in the family or something. And he said, there's an opening for you. He worked at Northrop Aircraft in Hawthorne, California, and he said, there's an opening for you as a commercial artist C. And I had no art training. Happiest moment of my life was to get out of high school. I never wanted to go back into anything that was like a school, And so I asked Smokey, he said, you ought to do it. And you'll never make enough money making saddles, working on ranches and everything. So I went back and went to work on the board. And after 7 years, he ended up being the art director there. So it was a good deal. But I wanted to, I'll keep this a lot shorter than really, but I decided to go, I wanted to go paint. And I wanted to go to either Taos or San Miguel Allende down in Mexico and be an artist. And paint what I was always roping, and I like ranch life and everything. And so I think an artist does things, makes statements about things of which he loves and is part of. And so I went, told Bob Moore, the vice president that the art department worked under, and he said, you're going to have to get a replacement for me. And he said, what are you going to do? He thought I was going to go to Hughes or North American or someplace, I said, I want to go to Taos and paint. And he said, you want to go to Taos and paint? I said, yep. He said, paint what? Like I was going to paint buildings or something. I said, no, I'd paint pictures and stuff. He said, tell you what, he says, I'll pay for it myself. He said, if you'll go to a psychiatrist first. That's the truth. Anyway, he said, you can't leave, number one. I said, you fired guys here day before Christmas, and no, you don't have any problem about it. Give somebody a pink slip. And here, I can't quit, see? He said, because you've got a top secret clearance, and you're working here, and we've got to, get a replacement for you, which they did, and I left, and so. Long story short, it was a long time coming, because when I first started, there was really no art galleries anywhere. There was one art gallery in Santa Fe, and
imagine that.
Yeah, and it was a tough deal, And I always thought if I ever got a painting on the front of the Western Horseman magazine, I'd be made, boy. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I ended up with 19 covers on the front of Western Horseman. And in all those years, nobody ever said anything about it. So don't count on that stuff, boy. Let me tell you that right now.
I love that story. And the thing that sticks out to me as an outsider is just the hard work and the work ethic and the kind of refusal to quit. And last night I was talking with Jody, and we were talking about his dad, Joe, who's obviously a legend. And that was one of the things that Jody kept coming up in our conversation, is just this work ethic, this just focus, not giving up, putting in effort with the art the same way you put in effort working on a ranch. And so, Jody, I was wondering if you could kind of expand on that a little bit and talk about your dad's work ethic and what you saw as a kid, because you've been involved with the CA since you were 4 years old.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about your dad's work ethic and how he pushed through?
Well, the fun thing, Dad always said that his the mechanical side of his brain was pink and juicy and unused, and the creative side of his brain was all wrinkled and was working all the time. So he wasn't one of those. He would usually hold the flashlight for me whenever we had to work on the car, because that wasn't his thing. But his work ethic, he was always, and anybody that was around him, his mind was always going. He always had a pencil in his pocket or in his hand. He would be sketching something or always looking at it, and it was never a job. It was always a pleasure for him to be able to do, because it was something that he always did. And his ways of doing it, he was, from the time he was born until the time that he died, he could always just do it. There was no formal training. He just had it. We were fortunate for that. For everybody that got to ever enjoy his work or be around him knows that, And then he loved to rope. He spent a lot of time on the other end of a heel rope from Fred here. They have a long history of heading and heeling and everything in between. It was a good life.
When you see what this organization has evolved into now, do you think your dad would have had any idea when you were 4 years old and he started out that both the organization and the Western art market would turn into what it has turned into?
Well, it developed into what it is because just through the natural growth of something. They got together and founded this group. John Hampton, Charlie Dye, George Phippen, Dad, and all those guys got together. They're like, let's get a group of artists together that all really enjoy what they do. And, they kind of, and at that time, there wasn't as many cowboys in the group as there is now. There was a lot more technical guys, the illustrators and classically trained artists. You had Tom Lovell and John Clymer and all those guys. And Bob Lockheed. They, a cowboy hat was kind of foreign to them, but they they went along with it, and it helped the group grow and mature into what it is today through that history, and having those great scholars and technicians and people brought it all together to what it was. There was a lot of different diversities in talent.
Joe said a long time ago, I remember him saying, that every cowboy wants to be an artist and every artist wants to be a cowboy.
Right.
Bill, everybody that I've spoken to when I've been doing my research, everybody just has the most respect for you, but the common criticism is that they say you need to lighten up and get a sense of humor. Is that right? Do you have any jokes for us? Do you have a joke? Because they might kick me out of here if I don't give you an opportunity to tell a joke.
No, we can always come up with a joke. You'll enjoy this one. Saturday night, midnight, preacher is in a panic. His wife's in a panic because first time in his life he's got a mental block. He doesn't have a sermon for Sunday morning. She said, "What are you going to do? What happened? You've never had this happen." He said, "Well, I was watching a program on horseback riding, a 3-hour. I can't get it out of my head. Every time I try to think of a sermon, all I see is horseback riding." She said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to give a sermon on horseback riding, and somehow I'll tie it all together." She said, "That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You know nothing about horseback riding." He said, "I know, but I'm stuck." Sunday morning, pull in the parking lot and park. And the wife said, "Tell me you're not going to give a sermon on horseback riding." He said, "Well, I got to. I don't know what else to do." She said, "If you don't mind, I'm going to wait for you in the car. I do not want to hear this." Off he goes. Well, he gets in his natural surroundings and everything calms down and he's thunderstruck. How could I be so stupid? Anytime you're in doubt, you give a sermon on sex. Good sex, bad sex, no sex makes for a sermon. Well, he had them all standing in the aisles. Service is over, they're filing out. Several of them see the wife sitting in the car. They ran over there and said, "Oh, you should have been in service today. Your husband gave one of the best sermons we ever heard." She said, "How could that possibly be? He only tried it twice. He fell off both times."
If the art doesn't work out for you, you can be a stand-up comedian.
Does anybody? Yeah.
That's great.
Does anybody have that on tape?
Yeah. This is going out on my podcast, so the agents from the L.A. comedy scene are going to be calling after this. But back to somewhat serious. Bill, when I was doing my Googling and my YouTube watching, I found a video of you, and you were talking about when you were a young man, George Phippen kind of gave you the nod and said, kind of gave you approval, and that you credited, what you said in the video is that you credit a lot of that with kind of jump-starting your career in art. And then I was thinking about what you guys did on Wednesday with the education for the local kids here in Fort Worth. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that, what that nod of approval from a well-known artist did for you, and then kind of any responsibility you feel to pass that along to the next generation.
Right. Well, living in Prescott, Arizona, George Phippen was a famous artist. Everybody knew. Now, I didn't know anything about art.
Yeah.
But I never grew up with a pencil in my hand like Joe did. I always grew up making things. I was whittling horses and dogs out of wood and making miniature saddles. And I just was doing everything with my hands. I didn't know hardly anything about Western art at all, other than the Western Horseman. George Phippen had so many covers, and almost any cow camp I went to, there would be a tore-off cover of a George Phippen pinned in the bunkhouse on the wall, And he lived down in Skull Valley. I went to school with his kids. But I really had no knowledge of art firsthand of anything. And my wife and I were going together. And my folks said to us one evening, they said, "Come and go with us. George Phippen's having a one-man art show at a local bank." And we went down there, and I was mesmerized. I had a life-changing moment there. And I got to see the art firsthand, and the sculpture was what fascinated me. Desperately wanted to do that. I was way too shy to go up and talk to Mr. Phippen, He had too many people around him. Unfortunately, I didn't, because he passed away a couple of years later. But then I started reading about Joe Beeler and Johnny Hampton and I got really interested. And I was trying to sculpt out of pottery clay, which was not working out very well. But we heard that the Phippen family had started a little foundry in Skull Valley, Arizona called Bear Paw Bronze. And so we called Mrs. Phippen and made an appointment and loaded my little clays up, and we went down there to visit with her. And she was so kind and never told me how bad they were. But she offered me a job to come and learn the bronze casting business with her son, Ernie. Uh-huh. Well, I quit a $2 an hour job with the Forest Service and went to work for the Phippen family for $1.50 an hour, and that was the greatest move, most important move I did in my life. Because by learning, she gave me access to George's studio, books on animal anatomy, books he had on human anatomy, horses, and all the different things. And I was using the wrong kind of clay. I had to get an oil-based clay and how to make armatures. So I'd work all day in the foundry, and then we lived in a little ranch house down there in Skull Valley, and my wife, she's an early go-to-bedder, and I'd sit there at the old dining room table, with the kitchen light on, and I'd be getting me put some clay together and sculpt. And then Ernie, he would critique my pieces, and I made 3 or 4 different things. He finally said, that one looks pretty good, let's cast it. So we did. Put it in a local gallery there in Prescott, it sold. I used the money to make another one, and it sold, and then I created another piece. Well, anyway, long story short, at the end of a 8.5-year period of working in the foundry, I made more money selling art part-time than I did working for wages, and I thought, well, guess I better try. And then through there, I met Joe and Bill Owen and Frank Polk, and we started going to the local every year at the down at the Phoenix Art Museum with the Cowboy Artists of America. And pretty soon Bill Owen, he called me up and he said, bring some artwork down so I can show the guys and see. And we never gave it a thought about ever getting in. We just showed up and brought some artwork. And Jim Reynolds came out of the door and said, well, congratulations, you're a new member of the Cowboy Artists of America. And that was in 1978.
Boy, if you made it past him, you did something. Jim
he was tough to go by. Yeah. He was tough to go by. So that was how I got started. To this day, I cannot draw you hardly anything. I'm not good at that. And people say, well, how in the world do you come up with an idea? And I just simply think about a subject that I want to do until I can almost see an image in my mind's eye. And then I build an armature and start putting clay on it. And as I go, I can see that if I change it this way and do this, it makes a better composition. Work at it as I go.
I love that. And it's just such a testament to the power of mentorship and people, which I feel like is such a huge part of y'all's organization, both as an organization and then when you go out and educate these school kids. I mean, I think they said they had 400 kids come through on Wednesday. And so you think if 1% of those kids are inspired to go off and pursue their art, I mean, that is a powerful, just 1%. And I would say it's probably more than that. So, I can trace back any positive influences in my life to certain moments. So I really value what y'all are doing. Yes, sir.
One important thing I found, once I got interested in the art, I started looking for somewhere to get, some teaching.
Yes,
there wasn't anybody giving any lessons for anything. I mean, the colleges were all into abstract art and cubism and that type of thing. If you mentioned realism, they just looked at you like you were stupid and just take a photo of it and forget it. That was the attitude. It was a real struggle. I mean, we're all basically self-taught, or once we met each other, we learned from each other in different things. But boy, there was nowhere to really go.
Yeah. Peer review is always important. I mean, the great thing about the CAs is they could rely on each other for, you'd say, well, how does this look? Or, they get on the phone and talk. And the great thing about the tightness of the group is that everybody, nobody was afraid to help each other. That was
absolutely
good point. Yeah.
That's one of the good things about the trail ride, was that everybody could sit around the campfire. And, misery loves company, so. And we can sit around the campfire and talk about the galleries.
I've definitely got a lot of questions about the trail ride because I feel like that is so unique, first of all, but then I feel like that's what the bond that brings you guys together. That, I mean, and no joke, the shared suffering, because it sounds like last year was quite an event. And kind of along those lines, Seth, I'd love to get your perspective. You know about as much as anybody can know about the art world. And I'm very curious, why do you, from your perspective, running the booth, what makes CA so unique? Why has it been able to stay together for 56 years? When you think about like the Tau Society or whatever it was, 12 years maybe. And so how does that, when you look at this group, what do you see as the strength of the group?
I've asked that actually a number of times. We at the Booth Museum are so honored to be the host of the 50th anniversary official celebration for this group. And that question came up many times during that week. And I think Freddie hit it on the nail on the head the best. He said, those Taos guys, they didn't like each other. These guys like each other. And, in some ways it comes down to just that you have a group that has a brotherhood, has camaraderie, they have integrity, both as individuals, as a group. They have a shared mission statement that they all kind of live by. And they walk the walk, they talk the talk, and they do what they say they're going to do. And that's gotten to be a little rare, unfortunately, in the world. And so to be, associated with a group like this, and the brotherhood, really, I come back to that word that exists, is what holds it together. And they have a shared idea about what they're trying to do, as Homer's alluding to, preserving our Western heritage, presenting it to the public, and doing it in a way that's authentic and has integrity behind it. That's what really I think the core of the group is. I didn't get to go this year. I had some things going on in my life that kind of prevented that. And, but the guys thought about me when I wasn't there, and I got this box in the mail one day, and I opened it up. There was a set of bat-wing chaps with a drawing by every one of these guys that was there on these chaps, and a note that said, we missed you, we were thinking about you, and hope you'll be back again next year. I mean, one of the greatest gifts I've ever received my entire life, and just came out of nowhere from these guys. And, that's the kind of guys you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And hear versions of that story time and again, just this generosity when it's really amazing to me. It would be amazing at any point in history, but given where we are now, as divisive as things are, it's even more powerful. And it's just amazing. Tim, I'd love to also get your take as being somewhat of an outsider, but a real expert on the Western art world. We had a great conversation last night, and you told me how your obsession with art began, and there's a real tie to the CA. And so I was wondering if you could tell that story again, because I think that's one of those ideas about this ripple effect of what the CA has. There's this, somebody throws the stone in the pond and these ripples go out, and that's really the case with a lot of your career and all your success. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in 1991, I came from New York. My wife and I have lived in New York until 19, so we were there 45 years. But my best friend from high school in Colorado was living in Big Sky, Montana, and he said, we're going to go down to Gary Carter's studio in West Yellowstone. And something came over me when he told me that. It truly, truly did. And so I flew out September, went down to Gary Carter's, drove in, the teepee out in the yard, and all of the things in the studio. I met Gary, and I subsequently ended up buying a large sketch about 3 feet wide of two mountain men on horseback at full gallop running down into the Snake River under Mount Moran. It's a study. It's not a finished work, but it's very powerful. Gary was an incredible draftsman and is. And so I bought that painting, that drawing. It was the first piece of art, really, that we'd ever bought. And it was $650. I thought my wife was going to kill me So much money, not so much anymore, and it's that has hung in our home since then. I mean, it's that good, and I'm a lover of studies, but so that was my first piece of art was from Cowboy Artists of America artist, and subsequent to that, I've had a very lengthy journey in the art community, and I know and am involved with many of the groups of artists in America, whether there be the American Society of Marine Artists, the Oil Painters of America, the American Impressionist Society, the Portrait Society. It's a long list, and I have wonderful relationships and friendships with all those groups. But the Cowboy Artists of America is unique in all those groups. I've pondered this knowing that I would be here today, and you guys are and not to take anything away from the other groups, but you're truly an American group. You think about all those other groups that I know and love so well, and fabulous, fabulous artists, but you have the unique position, I think, in all of the art cultures to be truly American, in the tradition of the American West that you do so well in presenting cowboys and Native Americans and the life of the West, the mystique of the West is unique in the CA, and as an art collector and art lover, maybe other than skill set and quality, which you guys have, and you've preserved that wonderfully by being very discriminatory in a good way to select who gets into the CA, but the idea of the narratives and the storytelling is not unique to you, but it's so powerful and it's so important in your artwork that we can hang your art on our walls and we can put ourselves in that scene and we can live it and know it and breathe it, and God bless you all for what you've done for us.
Yeah, I agree with all that. When I was talking with Jody last night, a lot of my career has been in land conservation, working with ranchers to conserve their ranches, and a guy like me from North Carolina can come in and help with that. But I hadn't thought about it until last night that I feel like all these guys they're conserving the West as well. They're conserving the culture of the West. And that can't be done with a fancy real estate deed or anything like that. It's through art and through storytelling that we really conserve this history. And so it's that really hit me last night. I think it's an interesting way to think about all this. Red, you're obviously legend. You are an artist. You can do about everything. You can interview people a lot better than I can. You should be sitting down here. But you through your career, you could be hanging around with any artist you want. Because of all the different people you've met and all the different opportunities you've had and all your talents. What is it about this group? Why do you want to hang out with these guys so much, and why has this been such a big part of your life and as a member?
Well, first of all, I'm honored that you'd call me a legend. I'd rather be Rookie of the Year. This is a very emotional story for me, because every once in a while, sometime in your life, one person comes along that changes the direction of your life and fills it with so much joy and privilege that you never believed possible, and it changes your life in a very positive way. And that happened to me in 1970. And I was staying in California. I never lived in California, but I stayed there for 8 years. and a friend of mine named Dave Burgess talked me into going with him to Montana to the Bob Marshall Wilderness to hunt grizzly bear and elk. And he said, I got some friends up there and we'll meet them when we get there. And so, I was all excited. A boy from the Texas Panhandle going to Montana was a little more than I expected and ever dreamed of. And the first person I met when I got up there was a fellow named Fred Fellows. And for some reason or another, we became fast friends. And we just clicked. And so in 75, then I had gone back up there and done with the guy who was the outfitter also ran the fair. So in 73, he hired me to come back up and entertain at the fair, and I got to spend a lot more time with Fred. He even took me fishing up in the mountains, and I was the only one that caught a fish. It was about 3 inches long, but it was the only one we caught. And so, anyhow, Fred invited me to come to an art show with this group at the men's club in St. Louis, Missouri. And so that's where I got to meet all the rest of the guys that were members at that time. And then he invited me in 76 to go on a trail ride at the HF Bar Ranch in Saddle String, Wyoming. And where I really got entrenched with them and became fast friends with all of them. And they became my family. And Gail and I still consider that. We consider them sisters and brothers from different mothers. Fred changed our lives in a direction that I never thought possible. And I'm so grateful, and I love every single one of them. It's been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and it's not near over. But we were, one year, I think it was 73, we were at the old ring camp at Vermeil Park. And Beeler said, "Boys, I think we ought to make Red an honorary member." And Frank Polk said, "Well, hell, I thought he was. I've been here forever."
I thought he was.
That was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, was to become an honorary member of the Cowboy Artists of America. And we've pitched our tents beside the most beautiful streams, in the most beautiful wooded areas, seen grasslands that are unparalleled anywhere else in the world, ridden together as brothers and experienced a lifestyle that we dearly love. And these guys can show to you in bronze and in paintings and oils and watercolors and what it looks like to them. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, so I've always admired that. But I can't tell you how proud and honored I am to be an honorary member of this organization, because they truly are my family, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, the word family, brotherhood, it just comes up time and time and time again. And Bruce, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. The interesting thing to me as an outsider is, in order to be an artist, you got to be a bit of a individualist, kind of a rogue, probably a rebel. You got your boss asking if you need a psychiatrist, that kind of thing. So you got to be willing to blaze your own trail and do your own thing. But then, so you got all these different artists who are then drawn together by this group, and they get in the group, and then they talk about how the group makes them better. Everybody from the most senior member to the most brand new member, everybody saying, "Well, when I walk in and I see everybody else's art, it makes me nervous because I don't think mine's good enough, but it's getting better." And so I was wondering, Bruce, if you could talk a bit about that. Why do you think this group, of all groups, why do you think this group has been able to kind of corral all these kind of wild individuals that are doing all this great stuff on their own and make them be a willing, happy, loyal, excited member of a group? Because it seems like in some ways they're kind of at odds.
Okay, yes, I understand what you're thinking about there. And, I would say that essentially, primarily, the life of an artist is a very lonely life. We spend all day, every day in our private place, as we should, and try to focus on that work that we're called to do. I mean, I know for myself, I can't, if I go 3 days without drawing something, I get in a problem, and those guys like Red that we've traveled with he knows I take paints or a sketch pad or something with me everywhere we go. And but we're called to do that, but it's a lonely existence. But I notice every time, and this happened Tuesday night this week, that when we came together and I scheduled what we call our family night, first thing it was Tuesday night, and we all met together, and we have a ceremony there that we do there that means a lot to us, called the Empty Saddles ceremony, where we honor the CAs of the past. And but instantly, I know I feel myself smiling, I'm laughing, and there's just wonderful camaraderie that comes out of that. And we spent all this time together, hadn't seen each other in a while, and here we come together. But maybe it's that commonality of the fight that we're in, and that we have that purpose together. We share that purpose, and we understand each other. Okay, so in a sense, you're out there doing your own individual thing, but then we share that common purpose, and I don't experience anywhere within that camaraderie a selfishness about, Grant and I talking about, well, if this kind of white paint, and if you use this and that, then that, I'm trying this and I like it, and that's just it's an open book, and where I came from and what started this, I was witness to this camaraderie. I was witness to it early on. I started in 1986 studying. There was the Cowboy Artists of America Museum down in Kerrville, Texas, and they taught 3 to 4 seminars, week-long seminars a year. And I started back then taking those seminars, and I was out there in the struggle privately, and nobody at all knew who I was, but I started taking those things, and I took every seminar that they offered for 7 years. Fred was there, Bill, but in fact, I was looking at the saddle stand we use in our empty saddle ceremony. I was looking at it the other day, and we've got a little engraved nameplate on the end of the saddle stand for every member that we've lost, and out of that long list, but 12 of the guys that I'd studied with have passed away. But it was a link to this really wonderful knowledge that was offered so freely. And Red talked about people that change your life, and how one individual can come along and make this big difference. And when I studied with the guys, so there was a number of them that made a big difference. But it all culminated after I'd studied for several years with them. I saw a Tom Ryan painting over in L.D. Brinkman's collection in Kerrville, and it was that guy laying in the bedroll, and he's got his night horse, and Seth, the piece, and it ran through me. I get emotional thinking about it today, standing in front of that painting, and so somehow I finagled Tom Ryan's address. He lived out in Midland, Texas, and somebody gave me his address there at the museum and wasn't supposed to. And so I sent him some photographs. We didn't do the email stuff back then. So I sent him some photographs, little 4x6 pictures of my work in an envelope. And Mr. Ryan, would you help me? And in the return mail, I get this letter back. Said, "Yeah, come on." And so Janie and I, we had 3 kids, and we didn't have a car that drive to Midland, Texas. But my mother had a van, a big old van, and so I borrowed that van from my mother, and we filled it up with kids and artwork, and we knew we had a friend in Midland, and so we knew we didn't have to get a motel room. So we drove to Midland, and I got my art out of the van, and dropped the kids and Janie off at the friend's house. Got to Tom's house and got my art out of there, and I never got any deeper in his house than the foyer, But he had me set that art around in the foyer. And I just basically said, "Mr. Ryan, tell me what I'm doing wrong, what I'm doing right. Just please tell me how to do what you do." And we talked for an hour, and he finally looked at me and he said, "I'm not going to tell you how to do what I do." He said, "I'm going to tell you what I'd do if I could start over." Mm-hmm. And And he told me, he said, I want you to go outside and I want you to paint for 30 minutes a day, every day. And I want you to do a 9 by 12 or an 8 by 10 in 30 minutes every day. And I took him seriously. And changed my life. Completely changed the way I painted. It taught me to see and to interpret what I see rapidly, and completely changed my whole direction. And just that piece of time generously given.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you use the word purpose, and I read personally, I'm just real interested in this idea of community and purpose. And there's this book that kind of changed my life called Tribe by Sebastian Junger, and he talks about a lot of the problems in society now is because we don't really have tight-knit communities, and a lot of people don't really feel a purpose. And I feel like you guys, you've got this purpose and you've got this unbelievable tight-knit community. It's kind of how we're supposed to be operating as a species. And I think, from my perspective as an outsider, the trail ride is a big part of that, and getting together and having physical activity where the stakes can be high, it could be dangerous. And so, Fred, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the trail ride and what an important part of this organization that has been, because you've seen it as long as anybody has.
Well, it really is. It's the thing. The Cowboy Artists of America wasn't started to be a big art show at a museum somewhere. It was started, like Jody said, of a bunch of guys that had kindred spirits to get together on a ranch and see how they work cattle there, and just the fun of being there and around the campfire. And once the group kind of got together, and Joe had a show at the hall,
Yeah.
and they said, well, you guys have started this group. Why don't the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City was brand new. They just built it. Said, why don't you guys get together and have a show here, right?
Right.
And so, but getting back to it, that was the first time they got together and really had a show of any kind. But
under one roof.
And under one roof, yeah, and not out of the back end of your car. See? The distressed frame that looks so good on Western art caused from it being in the trunk of a car. We started out to be a good frame, Yeah. So anyway, but getting around that campfire, and of course, Bill Nebeker and Joe and Bill Owen and a couple of other guys roped, and every ranch we'd go to, they'd try to save some cows back, and the guys that knew how to rope could go out and rope would help the cowboys work the cattle and stuff, and it was really a kind of what they call keeping your hand in, and like.
Keeping your thumbs too.
Yeah, keeping your thumb out of the dally. And anyway, it's a really an important part of the whole thing. And there was a new member, Frank McCarthy. He lived up in Sedona by Jody up there. Anyway, he was a new member, and they were from back in New York, back east, and he came on the trail ride. The first trail ride, we were down in South Texas, below Van Horn at a ranch that I don't know if Bobby French owned that ranch or one of the two, Bobby Hilton.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of those guys. So we're around the campfire all around, and I'm sitting next to Joe, and come circling in, probably getting a landing pattern to go to El Paso and land, was a 727, all painted black with a big rabbit on the tail. And, it was Playboy magazine's airplane.
Yeah.
And it's going, everybody's looking at it, And Joe said, oh boy, here comes the girls now and everything, this is going to be fun. They're just landing and everything. And Frank McCarthy says, he turned white. He said, what am I going to tell Mary? Oh, God. But But the trail rides were really something else and gave us a chance to be together. I know one time we stopped by a place in Shadron, Nebraska, and in the gift shop they had a casting in rubber of a rattlesnake that was the most real thing I've ever seen in my life. I had to buy it, because it's just, I mean, it looked real, and it's kind of jiggle its tail. It's kind of rubber, So we go on the trail ride, and I put that down in Martin Greeley's sleeping bag, see? And so we're all getting ready to close the camp down and rolling stuff up and go home. And suddenly I hear a great big scream, and the guy jumps out of the tent half naked. Martin Greeley, and said, "God damn, there's a snake in my bed." Anyway, he got over it.
Jody, I'd love to hear more your thoughts as well on the trail ride.
You've got to tell about the Beeler dig.
Yeah.
Tell it.
Haythorn Ranch.
Oh, we were up on the Haythorn Ranch in Nebraska, and they still run a chuck wagon, and it's not just for show. I mean, it's the real deal, and they have maybe 100 head of horses, or more than 100 head of horses that Bill Nebeker went with when we moved camp one time. And anyway, we got out to this place, and had to kind of behind some trees dig a latrine to go to the bathroom. I mean, they dug this latrine. Well, Joe stops by this antique store, and there's a great big box of old rusty things that used to the cavalry would put on their hats and stuff like that. They're all stuff from and arrowheads and all kinds of stuff. He
cartridge
buys
casings.
Cartridge casings. He buys a big sack of these things. And so while nobody's looking, he goes out and plants those things out there in that ditch, see, all around. And so the next thing you know, Bud Helbig comes in from out there and says, "God dang, look what I found out there." And he said, "Well, this was the old Army camp at one time. It had to be, because look at this." So everybody goes out there and they're digging out there. They're finding all this stuff, And they're coming in, and we're sitting having dinner there at the wagon, and old Bud's got that thing there, and I said, "Boy, that's a Civil War period piece and everything. What do you take for it?" He says, "Nobody's buying this from me."
And they dug a hole big enough you could have buried a car in. Dad felt really bad about it. He said they had hubcaps, and there was people sweating, and their fingernails were bleeding. Yeah,
Frank McCarthy and Howard and all of them. I mean, they were real artifacts. I mean, they weren't like fake; they were real. So he had fed them out there, and then nobody said anything. They were just going 100 miles an hour. The dirt was flying there, digging, and then he didn't have the heart to tell them that what he had done, so we left it alone. Well, we had a guy from Western Horseman, Chan Bergen, was on the ride. Next month's issue of Western Horseman said, "The CA ride on the Haythorns and the big historical find."
Dad felt really bad about it. He felt bad about it afterwards. It's like, boy, this joke got way out of control. Oh no! And it was always fun whenever he would be gearing up to go on the trail ride. It's like, what's he going to pull now? The rubber snake thing was always a good one. He had a big long rubber snake that he put in John Hampton's bed one year. So everything was off limits. There was nothing off limits, I should say, because the humor and it was great to see the camaraderie. Everybody could do it, but I don't think anybody ever knew that the Beeler dig wasn't a real thing until way later. Because, he was like, "I don't want somebody to let the air out of my tires." And another story was with Harvey Johnson. He was another one of those guys. He wasn't a cowboy, but he dressed up. And he had a Ford Granada, which was his cowboy car, and it had a big horse on the front of it. He had a hood ornament put on there.
It's a chrome horse.
Yeah, chrome horse. And so
Raring horse.
the boys stopped and got one of those little plastic horses and wired it up appropriately on the hood of Harvey's car, and you can use your imagination how it went. But there was a lot of fun with that they had.
Harvey didn't take that.
He didn't take it too well. He didn't take it too well, and if you ever saw pictures of him, he looked like Teddy Roosevelt. He had a brush mustache and the wireless rim glasses and the small hat, and his personality didn't match his look, but he was a good guy, good sport for putting up with that. But the trail rides were always a great thing for the guys to come together and really get to kind of blow it out. They'd have fun and they'd shoot guns. Everybody, however many guns were fired on trail rides, and sharps and everybody. Yeah, it was always a good thing.
Yeah, I got to tell you a deal about his dad and Frank Polk. Frank Polk was one of the early members of the Cowboy Artists, and he stuttered and really bad. And when he got sick, to show you how close the guys kind of become, he went into the hospital and he just never shaved or anything, and his hair grew long and it's white and white beard, and Joe said he looked like Santa Claus laying there in the hospital bed. And so Joe would take in a little airline deal of vodka. You can't get anything in the hospital. No nurse will bring you anything or anything. And he'll take these in and give them to him. And he went in and gave it to Frank one day. Said, Frank, he said, how are you doing? Frank goes, and Joe said, well, I can't hear you, Frank. Say it again. You got it down closer. And he said, Frank, I can't hear you and everything. Frank says, you're standing on my ear hole. So Joe said I damn near killed him,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And one time the Cowboy Artists had a trail swim in Tahiti, and we on the island of Moorea, and the hotel, there was a guy every morning got out and right in front of and raked the beach, made it really nice and everything. Well, Joe goes to a gift shop that was in town and buy all these really beautiful shells. The kind of conchs and everything, really beautiful. And he sneaks out at night and plants those. So this old boy goes out the next morning to rake everything, goes, holy mackerel. And so he starts picking up all these things, and not tell anybody about it, But he
did it twice, didn't he?
Yeah.
Y'all are making me nervous, scared like a fake snake's going to fall out of the ceiling on me or something.
If anybody was goosey in the group about anything, you were a dead man on the trail ride. I remember hearing that more than once. If they found out anything, I know Grant Speed took a lot of trouble, too, for different things over the years. But man, some of it you can't. You're sworn to secrecy on. But
yeah, these are the public stories. I'd like to know what the off limits.
I got to tell you one before you.
No, do it.
We had a trail ride down at the YO Ranch, at Charlie Schreiner's YO Ranch. And Grant Speed, who was one of the members then, borrowed a horse from his uncle and his old trailer and came down and brought it down onto the ride. And we had our ride and moved some longhorns and did this. And they got a big room to have a lot of fun in, a bar type deal. And everybody's saying goodbye and of course, Joe and some of us, Bill Nebeker and Red would hang around the bar a little bit longer, probably. Everybody's going home,
No.
Pretty soon, in comes Grant Speed going. I said, what's the matter? He could hardly talk. He had run all the way, from way on the road leaving. He had already loaded his horse in the trailer and was leaving down the road. So he said, I was driving down the road, and what comes up beside of him is an ostrich. And he said, my uncle's old horse took one look at that and turned the trailer. And he says, "You guys got to come and help me get that horse out of that." He's laying, he couldn't get out of the trailer, you know. So we went down and helped him get that horse out of the trailer, and they set it up straight, shooed the ostriches away because it's a wild game place too, and he went on his way. So.
Oh man!
He told me that horse he had to stop at every other town he went to, had to find a vet and give that horse an injection to keep him calm enough to get. And he said the horse was crazy from then on. He was just never did survive that ostrich episode.
Right.
That brings me to a question. I'm thinking about. So we're recording this on my podcast, kind of all over the world, and so. I'm sure people are listening and they're thinking, well, how do you become a member? Because it's such just an amazing group, but also a hilarious group. So, I mean, and this can be for anybody, but how would you, if you had to describe it to somebody, it's kind of like if you know, you know. I mean, that's the way I see it. But say you're describing it to somebody, how would you describe, what is the criteria for? Well,
for several years we had applications that you could ask for. But there's a criteria that you have to fit in order to become. You have to make your living as an artist. You have to have your artwork known in a well-known gallery. You have to participate in shows, major art shows. So those are criteria. You can't be a part-time artist or do whatever. You also have to do art that represents the West in the tradition of Russell and Remington. Anymore, we don't do the applications. We actually talk to each other about other artists that we meet. We might talk to them first to see if they have an idea that they might want to become a member. And then,
well, Bill might remember this. We had the second time I was the president, we had a guy send an album of his artwork, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't really bad, and then the group would vote on it, and actually it got to the point where we voted to have him come and bring his stuff so that you could meet him and talk to him and everything. And he said in there, that he'd love to be a member of the Cowboy Artists of America, that he's lived a life of the West and just loved the West and wants to make statements about it with his artwork and everything like that. But the problem is that he might not be able to be a member if you have to come on the trail rides, because he's doing time in penitentiary for.
He's doing time in the penitentiary.
We're talking about how we have fun with each other or at each other's expense, but it made me think that it's not always at the expense of another member. And you guys remember in Phoenix, Bill Owen, and at our host hotel then was the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and so we'd be there, and they actually had to kind of change the rules at the Ritz-Carlton then that you could be there with jeans on, because the rest of the year you couldn't come in there with jeans on.
Yeah, they took
so we were kind of, and all the staff and everything, really that was their favorite week of the whole year. But anyhow, we'd run into people that weren't familiar with our personalities, and so Bill Owen had a roping accident. Their rope come back, took his eye out, so he wore an eye patch, Well, he had a glass eyeball that was real bloodshot, nasty looking, just looked infected and bad, and we were on the elevator there, and a lady comes onto the elevator, and she says, "Oh, I love your costumes." She says, "But where's your kerchief?" And Bill says, "What?" She says, "Your kerchief. Cowboys have a kerchief." And he said, I had to give up. I had to give up wearing those. That's very dangerous." And she says, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, I was riding through the brush, chasing wild cattle, and I come through there, and that thing hung on the limb, and it was terrible. It was horrible. And she says, what do you mean? Well, in the meantime, while she's asking him, he turns around and he slipped that glass eyeball up under that eye patch. And he says, oh, well, when it caught on that limb and it came tight, it did this. And he lifted that eye patch up and that lady came
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, this looked like Igor. It was looking at the ground with all these big red lines. You know, he never put it under the lip. He wore it like a monocle, so it bulged way out.
Well, again, these stories are just crazy. And when I think about, where's the organization going? Where you got, what is your vision? And this can be for anybody. I mean, obviously there's a blockbuster comedy movie somewhere in the near future. But after that, I mean, when you guys think about the next 56 years, and this can be open to anybody and everybody, I'd love to hear where you think it's going, because it just seems like the sky's the limit in some ways, but it's also very contained and very special, and the tradition is so important. And so how do you think about the next 50 years?
We talk about this a lot. I mean, as members, we share our thoughts on this a lot. And certainly we want to embrace, we want to keep open the window, to do like Phil F., wonderful art that he does that is different from what we've had in the past, okay? And so we want that window to be open, but I think the unique thing about the Cowboy Artists of America is the authenticity of what you're going to see, and we demand that. And a lot of people don't know it, but we actually screen ourselves. We screen our own work prior to it being in the show. We have a committee that looks at every piece that we check and make sure, and we want this. We demand that accuracy, that authenticity, and so I think that's something we have to keep calling for. Okay, that makes this outfit unique.
I think
Please.
part of the answer to that question is still also looking backwards. And Fred, one of the things I wanted to maybe get you to talk about just a little bit is at the time when you were getting started, there's essentially no galleries, no museums, no magazines. There was no Western art market. And you've talked to me before about trying to sell your work at gun and knife shows. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, there wasn't any galleries to speak of, and of course the Cowboy Artists in the show started at the Cowboy Hall of Fame, and then next to the Phoenix Art Museum and on. Give everybody such a great chance of exposure and a chance to share your art with so many people. And we went through a period of time in the last few years that's just something very special. And hopefully it'll kind of keep going on. When I first started, there was no place to sell art, and I was living in a little cabin up in Montana on the Bull River, and there was a gun show in Kalispell, Montana, and I always liked guns and didn't have any money to buy anything, but I sure liked to look at them. So went over there, and there was a guy selling Charlie Russell prints, and I thought, geez, I could paint a little painting and some paintings and bring over, maybe sell them. And so I rented a table for the next year, which is $100 or something for the weekend, and took about 4 or 5 little paintings over there, and ended up selling them and trading for guns and stuff like that. And that kind of started by going with trading and stuff. And sometimes I could keep a gun then, and it was a hard time, but there's times I actually fished for real, for a dinner and stuff like that. But I don't know what sustained me, and I know that it's the same thing with Bill. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth either, and all these guys right here has worked hard, and then you ask yourself later, how did you manage to keep doing it? Where did you think on earth you thought you could make a living at it and do something? And it's just it's hard to put your finger on what just keeps you going, huh?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we're doing this today, this looking back, and as you asked the question, for looking forward. And you see the young artists that are interested in hearing these stories, like Teal, who put this together, and Brandon and Tyler and, all the young guys that have been brought into the group in the last few years. Where are we going to find another 10 or 12 of those in the next 2, 3, 4 years? And I think a lot of that's in projecting this heritage of this group and the importance of this group in creating the Western art market and finding artists who believe in that tradition and want to be the ones to continue it going forward. And, hopefully they're out there, and hopefully they and the group can find each other, and we can keep this thing going, as you said, another 56 years or more.
Well, I've kind of monopolized the question asking, and I would imagine there's questions out here, and I imagine there might even be questions among the group. And so I'd love to open it up, and you can just feel free to yell, yes, ma'am.
How do you decide where the trail ride is going to be? And is it ever the same place twice, or do you try to just...
Oh, sure. We are so fortunate because we have got to be on big ranches that the average people have never been on. We get invitations. We've been to the 4 Sixes like 5 times. We've been to the big Haythorn Ranch 3 times. We've been to Hawaii to the Parker Ranch and different ranches in Hawaii. We get invitations to come to these places. So we get to see these things and participate in the ranch work that they do. It's been a wonderful, wonderful thing to do.
And it's a tremendous expense.
Oh, it is
to host it.
To host it.
Absolutely. They do it purely for the honor.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Do you ever entertain the idea of taking sort of the art patrons, for lack of a better word, on a trail ride with you guys?
We have had some over the years. Especially, we always invite the previous ranch that we've been on. We invite them to come to a follow-up ranch, sometimes before the next ride or whichever. They always get invited to come. We've had some other people from magazines come us a period of time, and when we were with the Phoenix Art Museum, the Men's Art Council, they were always the members that were in charge of the show. We always invited them to come. But we keep it kind of low-keyed. We don't let a lot of people come with a lot of advertisement, and there'll be one person taking photographs for us, that type of thing. But we kind of keep it.
But mostly, they're around when the group is around either a ranch house or something. But they're not out on the wagon if you're working cattle, because it's just first of all, the ranchers don't want the liability, and the guys better know what they're doing that's around, because it's real easy to get hurt out there and something happened to you.
Yes, sir.
As a member of about 6 years, I've come to the knowledge of something I never thought of. Maybe somebody you guys can speak to is that the modern Western art market, really for the last several decades, but it's really as a result of Cowboy Artists of America. Mm-hmm. I really had no idea that, Fred, you were talking about that. There was no industry really back then, and through subsequent decades. I'm doing this for the benefit of the folks who are collectors, who would love Western art today as we see it. I had never really thought of it like that. I've become so aware how critically important Cowboy Artists of America has been and still is, but it literally has established the format for the entire Western art market that we all live in today. Can somebody speak to that?
I think Seth could probably speak to that as well as anybody.
Well, at the 50th anniversary celebration that we had for the Cowboy Artists, we did several panels like this, and 2 of them dealt with those issues. One was, did the Cowboy Artists of America save realism? That was the question of the panel. And we had some curators from around the country, and they stopped slightly short of definitively saying, yes, it was only the Cowboy Artists, but it certainly was an important part of the art movement that went on. And I think it's hard for us to understand today. Jerry Smith, who was the curator at the Phoenix Art Museum for many years, said that the Cowboy Artists were like the pre-Raphaelites. Now go look that up and see what that's all about, because I can't explain that. But what he meant was that at the time, the Cowboy Artists were counterculture. Now, we think of Cowboy Artists being the most traditional thing in the world. But in the art world at that time, they were counterculture. they were swimming upstream against abstract and pop and minimalism and anything else that was going on out there.
Yep.
They were taking the hard way. There's actually an article about Harry Jackson, who was a member for a few years, about an artist takes the hard way. And I think that's a great line, for the Cowboy Artists at that time, that they were bringing realism back to the forefront of the art world. And particularly for all those people who grew up and appreciated the Western way of life and grew up on the movies and the television shows and all those things. And that rode that wave to creating this Western art market. And certainly there are other factors in play. When I write about this, I also talk about the opening of the Indian Art School in Santa Fe, which happened about the same time that the CA got started. And that group helped bring more contemporary style Western imagery into the picture and helps make Western art a bigger tent that still is expanding today. But it does have its roots in the CA for sure, from my perspective.
This question was a little bit difficult to hear, but the audience member asked if the CAA is at all concerned about finding new members and keeping the roster full of great, authentic artists in the coming decades.
What we're doing, and it is 17 artists now, and it has been more in the past, but it's also been less in the past. Okay, it varies, and we don't have a target number. Quality is our main concern. Okay, so. But yes, with our requirement or our emphasis on authenticity, let me put it that way, then it gets to be a little bit difficult to find those members that we want. So one thing we're doing is we now have the Cowboy Artists of America Joe Beeler Foundation, which is our educational arm. And we're very active in that development. Not only here in Fort Worth, on Wednesday we had 375 high school kids, inner city, rural kids, in the show with demonstrations going on and talking to them. So we're working with the kids, okay, but also taking artists that are very, very far along, that they're developed, but they need that other piece of information, that piece of the puzzle that brings them into that highest level. And so the Beeler Foundation is about that also, okay? Teals is current president of that foundation. The board of that is made up of all CA members. Was established how many years ago? But in Joe's honor with that name. So we're active in developing those people.
To your question about finding ones that might have some talent and coaching them up, Red Stegall and I had a very passionate discussion about this under the wagon fly maybe 3 years ago, and I thought Red made a great point counter to my argument, which was you can't put the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, or however that goes.
Either way.
They got to be at a certain quality level to be in the group, or they drag the group down. And,
right.
You got to be selective, and you got to have standards.
I also think that it has something to do with the attitude of the population. we go through stages. There was a time we had 8 hours a week of Westerns on television.
Right.
We had a whole Western attitude, and that's when the Cowboy Artists took off, was during that time period. And then we go through time periods where we adhere to plastics and tinsel and untruths. They don't mean anything to us. I mean, they're part of our life, and we get used to it. And then all of a sudden, we want to feel leather and oak wood again, and it's because of something that relates to the land and it relates to the values of this great country. And that's what Western art is all about. It's about who we are, who we've always been, and the set of values that were developed when we were totally an agrarian society. In 1938, 70% of all of our population lived on farms and ranches. Today, it's exactly the opposite. So we've moved to the cities where we're a me population instead of a we population. And so the closer we get to the land, the closer we get to the set of values of honesty, integrity, and loyalty, and work ethic, dedication to our family, convicted about our belief in God, and practicing common decency and respect for our fellow man every day we live, the more this lifestyle becomes important. And as time goes on, I honestly believe that there are a lot of artists who really don't know which direction they want to go. But if they get caught up in the real thing, maybe they'll start painting Western scenes, and we'll find more. This isn't the end of it. I mean, just because just got a few members less than we've had before doesn't mean it won't grow. And times will change, but I believe the attitude of the American population has something to do with that.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Jody? Yep.
Those are great words, Red. You know, one of the things from where I've been sitting for 59 years is and watching all the different artists and the movement of Western art is the storytelling. And the important thing, I remember so many times going in, I mean, I've been in most of these guys' studios, and I appreciate when you walk in and see a blank canvas, or you see one in progress, or you see a bronze being started, and to know what goes into it and how it gets there, and the story being told, you know, the history, and there's young people out there that are just dying to do this. They don't know how, because they don't have the courage to take the first step or have somebody push them through the door to do it. And that's probably the hardest part. I don't know how many times I sat there watching Dad tapping a paintbrush on his, you know, the side of his head or something, and then he'd go get a pencil and start fooling around with an idea on canvas and to how it gets blocked in, or the same thing with anybody in whatever their medium is and how it works and the thought process. People are being, if you're trained to think outside the box is really important, you know, and to be able to think. Sometimes it's not always, you know, necessarily a Western theme that comes to mind, but it might be something you see or you read about. Dad always thought this was great, that you could go somewhere. We spent a lot of time doing road trips. We'd go out to where things happen, and then I could tell he was putting it together in his mind how it might have been when it was there, and then it comes out as a drawing or, you know, a bronze or whatever it is. His interpretation of the, you know, whatever the history was or whatever story he wanted to tell, it was how he had it. And that's the beauty of all these different artists and everything that you see. You walk into that room last night and you see all those canvases and those bronzes and everything. Picture every one of them blank. And then what it took for it to get there, and however many hundreds of thousands of hours it took of someone's brain, the horrible wrinkly side, not the pink unused side, but, you know, using it up and everything. And it gives you greater appreciation. And through the Joe Beeler Foundation, and you hear about 400 kids coming to see this show. Hopefully you figure if there's 10 of them that come out of that and going, I want to be a sculptor, I want to be a painter, or I want to be, you know, what I want to be an artist. And they did their job. You know, that's.
I think some of you saw there was a gentleman named Mr. Sheridan who was here last night at the preview. And last weekend I had the opportunity to just shake hands with him at Red's Ranch Rodeo and Cowboy Gathering here in town. And I mentioned to him last night, I said, you know, you think about writing an artist storyline maybe into one of these deals at some point, maybe help us out in the Western art market. And he looked at me and said, that's not a bad idea. But Red said when he introduced him last week that he thought he had done more to bring attention to the Western way of life and Western heritage than anybody in the last 100 years. Now you think about 100 years, that was a pretty big statement, and I think he's doing it. And is he going to have some impact, do you think, on Western art and people being more interested in the West and the art?
I think he already does. You know, I've got friends in the hat business. They're selling more hats than they can make. They're taking orders for 24 because they don't have the inventory to supply the demand. The boot business is phenomenal. So that happens every time we have a change. And we'll take the foolishness for a certain period of time, and then our whole country revolts. And that's what's happening right now. We're going back to, I like to say, we want to feel leather and oak wood again. And so when that happens, everything Western comes to the forefront. And I really think that even though not everybody watches Yellowstone, it's done more to for the progression of our lifestyle than anything that's happened in the last 100 years.
Well, that's a great way to, you wrapped it up better than I could. Thank you all so much. It's an honor to sit up here with you and keep up the great work.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.